Hi honey buns, I'm going to talk a little bit now about speaking your personal truth. This is a video that I feel really called to make today. So I'm going to posit a few thoughts and I would like to know what your thoughts are in relation to this concept. Obviously, we talk a lot about the importance of being able to speak your personal truth, and that's not just because it's important to be able to express what you want and what your desires are and who you are as a person, but it's also sometimes to make sure that we nurture other people and we give each other the benefit of our opinion. It can sometimes be very difficult to give somebody an opinion, even when it's born out of love and concern. It's difficult to give somebody our opinion when it's not what they want to hear. Sometimes our intuition really comes up from deep inside and encourages us to say something, which is very difficult for the other person to hear. And speaking your truth in that instance as well can be very difficult. I've been interested on and off through my life in the concept of white lies, these little lies that we tell which save somebody's feelings, which save somebody from being hurt. I think a few times during my life people have said that they don't believe that white lies exist and that you should always speak the truth. But I think that it depends on a few different things. Personally, I feel that a lot of people give themselves a very hard time about speaking their truth. A lot of people push themselves to speak very authentically all the time and express their feelings all the time because they worry that they're being false or fraudulent if they don't do that. When in reality, there are certain circumstances that can occur which make it not so helpful to speak the truth, or at least not so helpful to speak it in that moment. I think really what we're doing is we're putting certain filters in place which stop us from doing things which in the long term are going to be inappropriate. Sometimes we hold our tongue because we know that it's not the right time, or that we're not saying it in front of the right people, or that it's not the correct set of circumstances which will make our personal truth productive and useful. And that's why we refrain. And I don't think there's anything false or fraudulent about that. I think it's something that we do when we have tact and when we have empathy. It's very difficult when you have people in your life who don't really have these kinds of filters. There are some people who just simply don't have these filters. They will always speak their personal truth regardless of who's around, regardless of how much pain somebody's going through at the time that they speak their personal truth, regardless of the circumstances which are inherent. Situations sometimes require us to hold our tongue until such a time as we have a better understanding of what's going on, or until such a time as somebody is emotionally strong enough to actually handle the personal truth that we have to speak. And you all have to make your own judgment on when that is. Some people refrain from speaking their personal truth for years because they're afraid of hurting somebody who's particularly fragile. But in refraining from speaking the truth that you really need to get out there, you yourself are all the time becoming more emotionally fragile because you feel unable to be your authentic self and you feel unable to push forward and live the life that you want to live on your own terms. Sometimes it feels like it's never the right time to get a personal truth out there. You're constantly waiting for somebody's life to get a bit better, or for somebody to be in a better position, or for somebody to be emotionally more stable before you come out with what you really need to say. And before you know it, 10 years have passed and you still haven't really said what you wanted to say. I read a book by, I think her name is Stephanie Dowrick, called Forgiveness and Other Acts of Love. And in that book, I remember she talked very clearly about a patient that she had who came to her for therapy, and the patient was the other woman of a man who simply didn't feel that he was able to leave his wife. He didn't love her anymore in the same way that he did when they were married, but it was one thing after another in their marriage that meant that he didn't feel able to express eventually the truth. I don't love you in this way anymore and I need to move on. And as a result, he broke contact with this other woman out of the guilt of seeing this other woman, unbeknownst to his wife, but he never felt like he was able to really express this truth and to end the marriage, even though he was desperately unhappy. He was always waiting for that right time, but there were always difficulties for his wife, and then his wife got cancer, and then she recovered from the cancer, and then he felt like he couldn't leave her then because she'd recovered from the cancer. And it went on to the point where he never really got to speak that truth that he so needed to speak. He was living half a life. And that's so difficult because in reality, there was no right time. There was no right time in their marriage for him to come out and admit and express his personal truth. He always kept it within. But in light of the fact that there was no right time to tell his wife that he wanted a divorce, did that mean that he should not have told her at all and continue to live the half life? And in reality, also then expect his wife to live a half life because she never knew the truth? So it's difficult, we have to consider these things. I think it's important to consider the circumstances before speaking a personal truth which is going to be particularly difficult, or which is going to instigate great change. Sometimes the circumstances are not always a fruitful time, and again, you have to use your intuition, you have to go with your gut. You have to consider what your core principles are. And for many of us, our core principles are things like patience and tolerance, kindness, being loving, showing compassion. And our core principles are also things like authenticity, the right to live life on our own terms. A lot of us feel that we have to be who we are regardless of the different extenuating circumstances that might make us feel that we have to be restrained or repressed or unable to express what we feel. So your core principles will always guide you. Sometimes you need to put your core principle of kindness over your core principle of being authentic at all costs. I think it's very difficult when we talk about core principles and we talk about the way that we want to live our lives, because so many of us become restrained by our core principles. We become slaves to them. We're constantly trying to be so at one with who we feel we are and who we really want to be that we forget that sometimes we need to be flexible. Your core principles are always there, but you are free to be malleable according to the situation. If you feel very, very strongly about speaking your personal truth, being authentic at all costs, and always saying what you feel, you're still entitled to have that core principle whilst at the same time recognising that it might not actually be the right set of circumstances for you to come forward. It doesn't mean that you're being disingenuous or fraudulent. It means that you are being tactful and considerate and compassionate sometimes. And some people have an understanding of this, but some people find it very difficult to accept that their core principles are intact and who they are is intact, regardless of whether or not they speak their truth exactly as it comes into their mind or they speak their truth exactly as it comes to them. Sometimes we need to refrain. Sometimes we need to have a look at what the extenuating circumstances are. And sometimes when we look at those circumstances, we realise that we can't always act exactly when we want to because things are not rolling that way. We need to wait for fate to roll out a little more before we say what we need to say. So you always need to use your intuition to judge. I think a lot of people speak their personal truth from a place of ego, in the sense that they are being defensive or they're trying to make a point, they're trying to be superior. There are certain circumstances you come across in life where you recognise that even though you really want to put your personal truth out there and you want to speak about something that's really important to you, that you feel super passionately about, sometimes you need to realise that the reasons that you have for wanting to speak your truth come from ego. And this is another place where it's very important to think about your core principles. One of my core principles is kindness to others and tolerance of their different opinions. So when I want to speak a truth which I know might be quite explosive or subversive, or which I know might place certain changes into play, I try to think about whether or not I want to do it from ego level or from heart level. I think about whether or not I want to speak my personal truth in order to make a situation better for myself and others, or do I merely want to speak it to make a point, or to prove that I'm right, or to hurt somebody or bring somebody else down. I'm not exempt from feelings that come from ego. I am not exempt from the shadow self. All I can do is recognise that it's there and recognise that sometimes it gets itself into the driver's seat, and I need to acknowledge that and put techniques into place to avoid that. Because I don't want to use my personal truth and my words and my communication to hurt others or to make a situation more difficult. I think this is particularly true when it comes to anger for many of us, whether we're slow to anger or whether we're quick to anger, whether we feel that anger is more of an intrinsic part of us or it's more on the parameters of where we are, soul speaking. I think that anger is a time when speaking your personal truth and coming out with words that have so far only been internal, putting those words out into the world when you are fueled up with anger, often introduces a lot of ego level reasoning. It introduces things like wanting to be defensive, wanting to deny the other person's position, wanting to make a point, wanting to appear superior, wanting to say, I told you so. All of these things that feed the part of the ego that wants to feel stable and in control and wise and so on. We want to feed that perception of ourselves as being enlightened, or that perception of ourselves as being able to take a look at the way other people are going wrong and judge them for it. I think sometimes when anger comes into being and we want to speak a truth, it's not always for the right reasons, and that's okay. None of us are infallible. I think that there's no way really to get away from some of the destructive elements in our shadow side. We're not trying to get away from them. We're not trying to repress them. The point is not to feel guilty that you want to speak your truth for less than honourable reasons. The point is to recognise that you may want to speak your truth for less than honourable reasons, and then refrain from doing so because your higher self taps you on the shoulder and says, you're bigger than that, you're better than that, you have a bigger and better purpose than that, you don't need to do that, you hold your tongue because you're not putting your truth forward for the right reason and you know it. I think that's all that can be done. You know, it's always important never to berate yourself when you recognise that you maybe want to say something for less than honourable reasons. The point is not to berate yourself or hate yourself or be shocked that your shadow self has kind of shown up. The point is to forgive yourself. The point is to level with yourself. The point is to be honest and raw and real with yourself and laugh at it a little. I do laugh when I see my shadow self kind of grooving into the room and dancing around and me kind of getting on board with it. I laugh when I recognise it. I think, my God, that's really coming from some part of my ego that I don't want to give precedence to. Why would I do that? You know, that's not going to have any long-term productive results, so I'm not going to do it. I've managed to recognise that I wanted to do it for reasons that would bolster my own ego, but now that I've recognised that that was what I was going to do, I'm going to refrain from doing it because it's not going to be helpful. So I think it's important to ask, am I wanting to speak my truth for the right reasons? And the right reasons really tie in with your core principles. So the right reasons would be things like, for example, if you see yourself as a kind person and a patient person and as a person who wants to allow instead of resisting, and as a person that wants to build community and unity and harmony with other people, then the right reason for speaking your personal truth would be something like being honest with somebody because you don't want to lie to them, or you don't want them to have to feel eventually betrayed because you didn't come out and say something that is actually a secret and would be very destructive and damaging if it came out at the wrong time. The right reason would be something like being kind to somebody, being able to support somebody, creating greater unity and greater understanding. And reasons that are kind of less in alignment with your core principles would be things like trying to cause an argument or trying to make a point that you know in the long term is petty and isn't going to go anywhere good. A lot of the time when we speak our truth, there's a right time, there's a right place, and there's the right people involved. I remember once 2 of my friends were having a discussion about when he ought to come out to his parents. He'd made the decision that he definitely was going to come out to them. And he was talking about how he needed to come out to his mother, his father, but also his 4 siblings as well. He wanted to kind of sit down and have family time and tell them all together. Very courageous, super cool. But he said that the only time really that his 4 siblings and he and his mother and his father are all together at the same time is Christmas. And he knew that his father might have a bit of an adverse reaction to the news. Although he felt that eventually both of his parents would manage to simmer down and be cool about it, he said that he knew that they had no idea that he was gay, so it was definitely going to be a shock. And I remember one of my friends saying to him, and she's such a wise chick, she said to him, everything that you want to say to your parents and your siblings is completely courageous, it's totally in line with your authenticity, props and kudos to you. However, is it the right time and the right place? We're talking about Christmas here, so if you're saying it's the only time that they all get together, then it's obviously a time that has great significance and importance for all of them. And if you think about your 2 younger siblings, you know, one of them is just split with their boyfriend, the other one has just finished uni, they're both going through very transitional times themselves, and they probably are thinking that this Christmas is going to be mellow and contented, and they're going to get a lot of that good stuff, that comfort from the family. So is it the right time and the right place? Are you thinking enough about the negative repercussions that it could have for others? And then she kind of compromised with him. She said, you know, how long are you there for? And he said he would be there for just a few days after, kind of like 2 days after Boxing Day, I think, so just before New Year. And she said, I think what you should do is if they're still all around a couple of days after Christmas, you can broach it then. Let them have their family time together and you enjoy that family time too. You know, your gayness is not going anywhere. Your gayness is still going to be there at another time. But just think about right time and right place, because you want to feel as comfortable afterwards as possible. You want to feel as much as possible that you did the right thing. And if your siblings are upset and unsettled and your parents are, not communicating with them because they're too concerned about kind of focusing on you and this news that you've just given them, there's going to create this sense of disharmony and this sense that, attention is being taken away from focusing on the fact that you're a family unit and whether or not they care that you're a screaming queen, they love you. And it's that family time. So really that was a great example from my own life where I've seen somebody say, your authenticity is beautiful, celebrate it, honour it, there's nothing wrong with it, but make sure that you choose your time wisely for yourself as well as for other people. It's not going anywhere. Your authenticity is not going anywhere. But, in order to make yourself as comfortable with what you're about to do as possible, you need to find the right set of circumstances, and there is nothing fraudulent about that. And I thought that was really good advice. I mean, of course, I think that advice should be taken in the spirit that it's given. The advice and counsel that I give to my friends has got nothing to do with trying to foist an opinion onto them with insistence. It's always about objectively guiding and then leaving it open for them to make their decision. And of course, I will support them, whatever their decision is. And I'm sure that my friend would have supported my gay friend coming out on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve if that's what he'd felt called to do. She would have supported him and discussed it with him afterwards. But from heart level, she just said, right time, right place for yourself as well as for other people. And there's nothing fraudulent about thinking about those things. And I thought that was a really good piece of advice. I think some of the dangers of not speaking your personal truth would be things like people pleasing. I think that's how we get into a really difficult cycle, so many of us, for so long, this desire to people please, and these thoughts that we have, which often come from childhood or adolescence, those early templates that we have of interactions and relationships, those things that we are taught from our parents and the adults around us that make us feel that if we speak our personal truth, then we're always speaking out of turn, or that the opinions of others are very important and we should always think about trying to glow as best we can in the eyes of others, even if our personal truth is kind of burrowing away inside of us and really making us feel like we need to speak. A lot of the time, Jungian psychologists talk about the shadow self being implemented by the childhood and adolescence where you were taught how to behave appropriately, how to respond appropriately, what wasn't the right behaviour to exhibit in public, etc. So all of those little parts of our character that seem off, key, or idiosyncratic or odd, we bury them down. And a lot of the time, one of the things that's buried down is that knowledge we have that we can speak our personal truth and, not immediately turn into an alien from outer space. We're still human and we still matter and our perceptions are still legitimate and we have the right to speak. A lot of people forget that, particularly in certain relationships which hold quite a lot of weight, or where we feel admiration and we really want to gain the approval and validation of that person. Sometimes we recognise after a long time that personal truths have been living right down there that we have not felt able to speak to those people to whom we admire. We haven't been able to say them, and it's almost like we have been living a half-life. It's scary. It's scary how difficult it is to speak personal truths with certain people that you really wish would have a good perception of you. You often find that you are burying certain things. And we release our personal power when we don't speak our truth for those reasons. When we are seeking validation and approval from others to the detriment of what we really need to say and who we really need to be, then we are surrendering our personal power. We are thinking so much about the dangers of speaking in terms of how we might be perceived or in terms of how relationships may change, that we are forgetting that the relationship with ourselves is paramount and that we need to be able to approve of ourselves and validate ourselves, encourage, nurture and support ourselves. We're so concerned about whether or not it's going to have a negative effect on the connection we have with somebody else that we're failing to consider whether or not that connection is really so important and really so nurturing if we're terrified of speaking our truth within the context of that relationship. Is it really as nurturing as we think if we are terrified of saying something that we feel that we need to say? And remember, the words that you choose to use should be in line with your core principles too. Authenticity doesn't have to be destructive. And I think a lot of people who speak in anger, a lot of people who don't take that breather before they come out and say something, they just speak in the heat of the moment. I used to be like that. I'm one of those people who, when I'm in love or when I'm experiencing a transpersonal, beautiful feeling of unity, I'm crap with words. When I'm passionate, when I'm feeling politically charged, when I'm angry, when I feel frustrated, that's when my tongue becomes like a knife. Words just come to me and I just can't stop. So it's kind of those feelings more that help me tap into my eloquency. When I'm in love, I'm useless. I couldn't write a love poem to save my life because it just goes beyond. I just can't engage with what I'm thinking. Whereas for a lot of people, it's the other way round, right? For a lot of people, when they feel those beautiful, positive, overwhelming, expansive feelings of love, that's when they really get vocal. Whereas when they're angry, they can't get the words out. The throat chakra just clogs up with bile and anger, and they can't. It's like so yeah, with me it's the other way round. The throat chakra is like 100% connected to my anger energy frequency. I don't know, it just becomes a very clear channel at those times where I feel like really passionate or really angry or really like I need to put this forth, I need to stand my ground, I need to feel strong in the earth, and you're not going to convince me. That's when my throat chakra gets freed up. It's like a machine. But you know, the words that you choose need to be in line with your core principles. Authenticity doesn't need to be vicious. And a lot of people who speak out of turn or without thinking, when they're angry, when they're frustrated, they later justify it by saying, I was just being authentic, I was just speaking my truth. Okay, yeah, you were speaking your truth, you were coming out with your truth, but the words that you chose and the way that you chose to put them across was probably not as authentic as you'd like to think, because one of your core principles, deep down when you really analyse it and assess it, one of the things that you think that you are and that you would hope other people think you are is kind and considerate and not intentionally destructive. So, you know, if you feel that part of your core self that you align yourself with is kindness or with the desire to be constructive rather than destructive, then the words that you chose and the context you chose to put them across in, the way you spat them across the dinner table at someone, or the way you were enraged and you weren't listening to somebody else's point of view and you were screaming over them, that the way you conducted yourself in anger, was that authentic? Was that really truthful? Was that the way that you wanted to get it out there? Probably not. You probably wish that you had done it in a way which was more in alignment with how you view yourself as a kind individual, as a individual who wouldn't want to put somebody through unnecessary stress, even if you did disagree with them. So for me, you know, in my younger life, and as I've told people on this channel before, I did used to suffer with anger management issues. I was a very angry teenager. I had a lot of difficult situations in my younger life, and instead of actually processing them productively, I let them turn into rage. And I was very hostile, and I worked from ego a lot. And I don't think ego is necessarily a bad thing, but if you see what I mean, I refuse to have a soul connection. And I refused to see the soul connection between myself and others. I felt alone. I was a lone wanderer, and everybody else was subject to my judgment and my opinion, and sometimes my dismissive attitude as well, and my sense of superiority. I was a real little shitbag, and I've grown a lot since then. And now I choose my words very wisely. And my mother said something to me that I'll never forget. She said to me, when you are really, really angry and you are in a situation where there's a lot of pent up frustration and negativity coming to the surface, do not speak until you are ready to speak in alignment with who you actually are. Even if the person that's involved is pushing you to speak, even if that person is almost baying for a fight, even if they're dangling bait in front of you, even if they're angry with you for not replying to their messages or not picking up the phone, don't go there until you know that what comes up out of you is in alignment with what you really want to say and how you really want to say it. If you feel that anger is going to make you do something which isn't in alignment with how you want to deal with the situation, then you are entitled to take yourself off and to not engage with the other person until you're ready to do so calmly and in alignment with who you really are. And I totally buy that advice. I buy it, and I'll keep buying it because it's served me well. Much love, darlings. Thank you so much for listening.